Hello and welcome to Fluid Mechanics. My name is Dr. Mark Taylor, lecturer in civil engineering. So in this unit we're going to look at the subject of open channel flow. So this is unit 7 of 10, and in this unit we're going to look at the flow of liquid in open channels. We're going to look at the fundamentals, uniform flow and specific energy. So during this session I'm going to explain the various types of open channel flow. I'm going to consider the Chezy and Manning equations for uniform flow applications. We're going to look at energy and momentum principles for different flow conditions. And we're going to consider the geometric properties of channels. We're also then going to look at critical depth and the subject of hydraulic jumps. So by the end of this unit, you should be able to explain the importance of cross-sectional area and channel design, apply the Manning and Chezy equations to open channel design problems, define the Froude number and explain its relevance to open channel flow, be able to define steady and non-steady flow in open channels, identify the occurrence of subcritical and supercritical flow, and explain the factors which affect flow in open channels. So I'm just going to start off with an introduction to the subject of open channel flow. So natural rivers and engineered canals can be considered as open channels. These open channels are used for water supply, transportation and irrigation purposes. Even the Romans built aqueducts and they used them to transport water. Barges have used canals to transport bulk goods across Europe. They're now generally used for recreational purposes, and they're used as transport corridors, for example cycling paths and walking paths. They're constructed from a combination of concrete, brick or clay lined, and the Union Canal is a good example of a local canal, engineered canal, and that was built around the 1820s, and when that was constructed it was considered a superhighway of the time. The Union Canal was conceived in 1793. It was surveyed and designed by civil engineer Hugh Baird in 1813, and then eventually opened to traffic in 1822 after about 4 years of construction. Hugh Baird was born in September 1770 and died in September 1827. He was born at Westerton, Stirlingshire, and he was the son of Nichol Baird, who was the surveyor to the Forth and Clyde Canal, designed by John Smeaton. He was also the younger brother of the engineer Charles Baird. Ratho continues to have a road called Baird Road in it, and it's just as the approach to the bridge that takes you over the Union Canal. So the choice between a pipe or channel depends upon the solution which is most economical. If you consider the capital expenditure and the cost of operation and maintenance, channels are pretty convenient and economical for conveying large quantities of water over flat land in large irrigation channels or floodplains. Open channels are used for conveying stormwater in Asian countries during monsoon seasons as well. The topography can be a bit of a challenge, and the alignment must generally follow the contours of the land. The water velocities in pipes though can be a lot higher, and this can also reduce possibilities of erosion in channels. So let's consider some of the hydraulic differences. So open channels have a free or open surface, but pipes are closed and full flow. Water can only flow downhill in a channel, but can flow uphill in pipes. Engineered channels can have different cross sections too, but pipes are typically circular in cross section. The velocities in channels are lower to prevent erosion of natural soil construction, but channels need more attention and maintenance because erosion and weed control can be an issue. So we're now going to look at the classification of what are called free surface flows. So flow can either be steady or unsteady. It can be either uniform or non-uniform. So if it's steady, that means that the mean velocity and depth is independent of time. And if it's unsteady, then time is considered to be an independent variable. But the steady flow can be uniform as well, which means that velocity and depth are independent of the position coordinate x in the direction of flow, or it can be non-uniform, where velocity v and the depth y vary in magnitude along that coordinate x. This is summarised in the table shown below. So steady uniform flow is a situation where terminal velocity has been reached in a channel of constant cross-section, so the mean velocity is constant and the depth invariant. In steady non-uniform flow, this is a common occurrence in rivers and engineered channels, and it occurs in two ways. Transitions, where there's a rapid change in depth and velocity, this is termed rapidly varying flow, and an example is a hydraulic jump or flow entering a steep channel. In the greater extent of the channel, the depth might not vary rapidly, but changes in a very slow manner, and this is what we call gradually varying flow. For example, the backwater created by a dam placed in a river, or the drawdown of a water surface as flow approaches a waterfall. So unsteady, ununiform flow rarely occurs, but unsteady, non-uniform flow is quite common, and examples include floodwaves in rivers, hydraulic bores, or regulated flows in canals. Unsteady flows are beyond the scope of this module. However, the hydraulic bore or the moving hydraulic jump is a good example. So the simplest open channel flow configuration is one in which the bottom channel slope and the channel cross-section is constant along the length of the channel. And since the flow is parallel, the pressure will automatically be hydrostatic and the discharge and momentum will be constant along the length of the channel. So normal depth is the depth of flow in a channel when the slope of the water surface and the channel bottom is the same and the water depth remains constant. The normal depth occurs when gravitational force of the water is equal to the frictional drag along the culvert and there's no acceleration of flow. So laminar and turbulent flow can occur in channels. For practical purposes, flow in rivers and canals is turbulent. The large hydraulic mean depths mean that we get large Reynolds numbers, and at large Reynolds numbers, the friction coefficient becomes constant and is determined by the roughness of the channel wall construction. So laminar flow in channels, when there's a depth of less than 25 millimeters and a velocity of less than 0.025 meters per second squared, are not really practical, so they're not going to convey an awful lot of water. So we're just going to ignore laminar flow in channels just now. However, if you're conducting laboratory experiments, there might be scenarios when you scale down structures that these actually cause laminar flow to occur. So be mindful of this if you're doing experiments in your fourth year. So now we're going to have a look at what we call the Froude number. The primary mechanism for sustaining flow in an open channel is a gravitational force. For example, the elevation between two different reservoirs will cause the water to flow through a channel that connects them. The parameter that represents this gravitational effect is the Froude number, and this is the ratio of the inertial force to the gravitational force. The Froude number plays a dominant role in open channel analysis. So knowing the magnitude of the Froude number, engineers can ascertain significant characteristics of the flow regime. So if it's greater than 1, the flow possesses a relatively high velocity and shallow depth. If it's less than 1, the flow velocity is relatively low and the depth is relatively deep. So we're now going to look at some of the factors that affect flow behaviour. So we're just going to go back to the subject of uniform flow. All the energy loss formula for open channels are based upon uniform flow. It only occurs when water flows along a long, straight, gently sloping channel. The flow is pulled down the slope by gravity, but friction is slowing it down. So if friction is greater than gravity, then the flow will slow down. The friction force is not constant, and it depends upon the velocity. And when these forces become equal, the depth and velocity remain constant. And this is called uniform flow, as I've explained before. And the water depth is referred to as the normal depth. So real channels have some variation in channel, shape, slope, or hydraulic structure, which changes with the depth and the velocity. So most channels are non-uniform flow, or gradually varied flow. So why do we not use non-uniform flow calculations? Well, we need to keep things simple. The accuracy and dimensions to the millimetre are not essential. So if you think about what we're building, we're going to be using an excavator to grade a channel, so probably about 100 millimetre accuracy is going to be acceptable. So the four factors that influence flow are the wetted perimeter, the hydraulic radius, the slope, and the roughness of the bed and the sides of the channel. So we're now going to look at the relationship between constant section and flow velocity. So let's consider an open channel with water flowing with a free surface, flowing by the action of gravity. In the channel shown in the figure below, the water flows with constant velocity and has a constant cross-section, and the base is inclined at an angle theta. Consider the balance of the forces in the water between the two sections a distance L apart. Because the water depth is uniform, forces F1 and F2 acting on the sections due to the hydrostatic pressure balance each other out. So the only force acting in the direction of flow is the component of the water weight. The flow is not accelerating, so this force must be equal to the friction force caused by the wall. So the cross-sectional area of the open channel is A, and the length of the wetted perimeter is S, so the mean value of the wall shearing stress can be calculated as shown. Because theta is very small, the inclination I equals tan theta, which is isomorphic to sine theta. So therefore, our expression for our shearing stress can be reduced to rho g mi, where m is the hydraulic mean depth. So if we express the shearing stress as F rho v squared over 2, using the friction coefficient F, we can then get a value for the velocity of the liquid. So what Chezy did was express the velocity as proportional to the square root of mi. And this is called the Chezy formula, with c being the flow velocity coefficient. The value of c can be obtained using the Gangulit-Cutter equation as shown. The value of c can also be obtained using the Bézin equation as shown. And more recently, Manning's equation has been used. So the values of n and alpha are coefficients which vary according to the wall conditions. And the table shown here shows various wall surface conditions, n numbers and alpha numbers. So let's have a closer look at the Chezy formula. V bar is the mean velocity, c is the Chezy coefficient, which varies with the Reynolds number and the relative roughness of the boundary, m is the hydraulic mean depth, and I is the slope of the total energy line. So that's the loss of energy per unit weight per unit length. So the discharge of a water channel can be calculated using the following equation. So the flow velocities at various points of the cross-section are not uniform. And the largest flow velocity is found to be between a depth of 10% and 40% below the water surface, while the mean flow velocity is at around 50 or 70% of the depth. So we're now going to have a look at the cross-sectional shapes and try to figure out which one's best. The sectional area A of the flow in a given open channel is constant, and given that C and I are also constant, if the section shape is properly selected so that the wetted perimeter is minimised, then both the mean velocity and the discharge Q are maximised. Of all the geometric shapes, if fully charged, a circle has the shortest length of wetted perimeter for a given area. So consequently, a circular water channel, or a pipe, is extremely important. So just as a little reminder, here's how you calculate the arc length, the area of the circle segment, the chord length, the sigota, and the angle theta. So consider the channel shown on the right. We need to obtain a section where the value of the wetted perimeter is a minimum. And we do that by looking at the change in S compared with the change in H. And we equate that to 0. Therefore we'll get area is 2h squared. Therefore h over b equals a half. So when C, A and I are constant, to maximise the velocity and the quantity of flow, the depth of the water channel should be half the width. So common shapes of channel are trapezoidal, rectangular and semicircular. We're going to have different depths and widths, so the formula must take this into account. So if you consider the case of the two channels with the same cross-sectional area but with different wetted perimeters, remember that friction controls the velocity in the channels. So the friction changes as the channel boundary or the wetted perimeter increases. In the wide channel, there will be more friction and the velocity will be reduced. So channels with the same area will have different carrying capacities. So we're now going to move on to the subject of specific energy in channels. So many open channel problems can be solved using the equation of energy. If the pressure is P, and at point A in the open channel shown, then the total head of the fluid at point A is the pressure over rho g plus the velocity squared over 2g plus z plus the elevation to the bottom of the channel, z0. So if the depth of the water is h, then h is the pressure divided by rho g plus z. So consequently the total head can be described as h plus v squared over 2g plus z0. So the total head relative to the channel base is called the specific energy, which expresses the energy per unit weight, and as the cross-sectional area of the open water channel is A and the discharge is Q, then we can express the specific energy as shown below. And this relationship is important for analysing flow in open channels. There are three variables, E, H and Q. Keeping one constant gives the relation between the other two. So if we consider a constant discharge Q, the relationship between the specific energy and the water depth is shown on the right. The critical point of minimum energy occurs when the change in the specific energy over the change in height equals 0. So when the channel width at the free surface is B, dA equals BdH. Thus the critical area AC and the critical velocity are given as shown. Taking the rectangular open channel as an example, when the discharge per unit width, small q, capital Q equals QB, as the sectional area A equals HB, the water depth H subscript C, which makes the specific energy minimum, is obtained from HC is Q squared over G to the power of a third. This water depth, H subscript C, is known as the critical depth. So a specific discharge requires at least a minimum energy, and this is known as the critical energy, E subscript C. The corresponding depth is called the critical depth, H subscript C. So for any depth greater than the critical depth, the flow is relatively slow or tranquil, and the Froude number is less than 1. Such a state is termed subcritical flow, and conversely for a depth less than critical, the flow is relatively rapid or shooting, with a Froude number of greater than 1, and the regime is one of supercritical flow. So finally we're going to have a look at what's called a hydraulic jump, and we're going to see some examples of this in the fluid lab shortly. So rapid or supercritical flow is unstable, and if decelerated, it will suddenly shift to tranquil flow, and this phenomenon is called a hydraulic jump. When a hydraulic jump occurs, energy is dissipated by it. This can prevent erosion of the channel structure. The energy released by the hydraulic jump can also be used to mix chemicals, but that's a subject for another day. The figure below shows an experimental result. Figure A, flow for the bottom slope of the weir, and B, the water depth for the energy change. So in summary, we've seen how open channel flow is complicated by the presence of a free surface. The depth of flow is variable, and the flow may be steady, but is not uniform. Frictional losses in open channels are described mathematically by the Chezy and Manning equations, and these relate velocity and discharge with geometric and hydraulic properties of the channel cross-section. Energy and momentum principles were also introduced, and there's more to follow in the tutorial exercises. Critical depths have been derived along with a Froude number. An explanation of subcritical and supercritical flow was also provided. So we're going to have a look at some of the tutorial questions, and these are now going to focus upon the design of open channels. So that's the end of Unit 7. We're now going to turn to the tutorial exercises. And the next unit is going to look at hydraulic structures. We're going to look at weirs, flumes, sluice gates and culverts. So thanks for listening, and bye for now.